But so we took on all those families, and since then there's been 69 expedition workers that have passed away since November 2012 that are part of our beneficiary community. And I think that that's something like 290 something family members that we've been supporting in some way or another through some sort of grant. And so we do a wide variety of programs. But the primary one, which it started with, is this cost of living grant, which we're basically, for 5 years, providing totally unrestricted funds for families to be able to use however they need to use during 5 years. And we give it out every 6 months. And that's really to pay the bills, try to get them back on their feet. And we have a whole program that we go through each year, sort of leading up to that 5th year where then they're on their own.
Hello and welcome to the Duffel Shuffle. I'm Adrian Ballinger, and we're here to discuss the world of climbing and skiing in all its forms through the eyes of mountain guides.
And I'm Sam Kiekefer. In each episode, we'll unpack exhilarating stories, share invaluable insights, and get up close and personal with some of the most experienced and passionate guides and athletes in the industry.
Whether you're a seasoned alpinist or a weekend warrior, the Duffel Shuffle is your ticket to the thrilling world of climbing, skiing, and mountaineering. Join us.
All right, welcome back, Adrian. We've got episode 13 of the Duffel Shuffle podcast. How are you?
I am so good. I'm afraid I might be repeating myself, but once again, in Tahoe, and it's like just the most amazing time of year. Like we say that cliche-ishly, like, you know, this September, October, summer, late summer is so special. And I'm just so in it, like every day in a puffy, waking up, lighting a fire. By midday, it's like high 70s. I'm outside playing and the leaves are changing. And you can, I was going to say you can ski. You can't ski. You can get on the lake,
water
and
ski.
Wake surf. Exactly. Water ski, wake surf, swim every day, rock climbing. And then it looks like I might be doing a quick trip to the Himalaya in like 2 weeks. So I've been like piling on running, and just like it's been bonkers how good the running conditions are outside right now up high around Tahoe. That's me. How
I
about
gotta
you?
pause you there, though. A quick trip to the Himalaya maybe in 2 weeks. That's not typically what you hear.
I love my life. I know it's funny. Like I actually might go and try to climb and film on a mountain called Black Diamond for a project for a film. On a mountain called Mt Everest, supported by Black Diamond for a film I've been working on for years with my friend Dorje Sonam Sherpa. And this mountain like was actually one of the very first Himalayan big mountains that I did an expedition to. I think I was 21 in the mid 90s, and like it was years in the making and dreaming, and I sold t-shirts to fundraise to get enough money to get the permit and the plane ticket, and my partner and I trained for a year, and then we designed every little thing we'd put in our duffel bags, and then we went and spent 5 weeks on the mountain, and it like just the biggest experience of my life. And yeah, it is a little funny now to be like, oh, we came up with this idea 3 days ago, and maybe in 10 days I'll hop in a plane and go climb this mountain.
So are you pre-acclimatizing?
As of last night, I threw my tent together, my hypoxic tent, set it back up in bed, and jumped in. And that is the one piece of the puzzle. Like I in no way want to say like we should take these mountains lightly or altitude lightly. One of the biggest and scariest rescues I've done in my life was actually on this same mountain as well, Mt Everest, of an Austrian certified mountain guide who sat down to die with high altitude cerebral edema 200 meters below the summit. So it is really serious. And if there's one thing like that I'm concerned about, it's balancing that lack of acclimatization that I'm going to have as compared to the rest of my team who's on Cho-Yu right now in Tibet and will be very acclimatized. So balancing that lack of acclimatization with my desires to perform well up high.
Well, it seems like, you do have the advantage of living in Tahoe. You can climb, you can go train up at 10,000 feet. And so while you are not pre-acclimatizing per the standard protocol, you do have an advantage to begin with. And, I'm sure if you need to, you can shoot down to the Eastern Sierras for a couple days and get up even higher naturally and kind of help aid in that process.
Yeah, me and Em are actually going down on Thursday, and any flying I do in my little plane, we're doing without supplemental
Just
oxygen.
take the oxygen off.
And I think the important thing is, and of course I say this carefully because we still need to be humble in these mountain situations, but having a lot of experience of how my body works at altitude, I also know in general how quickly I can move to 6,000 meters, 20,000 feet. I know what it should feel like. And I think that gives me a lot of experience to know if it's not feeling like it should and to back off. And my teammates know that I'm going in knowing that I might not be able to go to the top and things like that.
Well, I was just going to say, you're not guiding. You're there on a work trip that's non-guide related. And therefore, if you don't make it to the summit, it's no big deal in the end.
Yeah, that's right.
In the grand scheme of things.
The goal is really to go have some epic climbing days with my friend and climbing partner that we're normally working together with Dorje in an epic place. And I can't imagine a place more epic than high up on Ahmed Valam.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to follow along on whether or not that happens and how it goes.
Maybe we'll get to do another episode from the Himalaya. It seems like people have enjoyed those. How about you? Before we jump in, I think you also have a painful, suffery adventure coming up this weekend.
I'm running a 20-mile trail race with 4,000 feet of vertical gain. My training's been, so, yep, not quite as exciting as maybe going to the Himalaya, but getting outside, doing some fun, suffery things in the hills of the Oregon coast.
Is that also like good prep for winter? Do you tell yourself that like this is all building to winter?
I mean, that was kind of basically I've got a close friend and we talked about running a race together, and he kind of put together a list of 5 or 6 races between Oregon where he lives and Tahoe where I live. And this was the one that was like, well, it's in the fall. I like to run in the fall, kind of build up for winter. It'll be a good, training motivator. So that was kind of why we chose this race, was just the timing worked nicely for building into winter. So yes, hopefully I can parlay this into winter, although all I want to do right now is not go running after this race. So we'll see what happens.
That mental reset is important. Cool. Well, excellent. Good luck this weekend.
Thank you. We'll keep you posted on how poorly I do and how much pain my body's in.
Nice one. Well, today our guest, I wanted to, mention and kind of tease that Dave Morton we have on the pod today, and I think a lot of people, listeners, will know Dave. People who really follow the 8,000 meter world in the Himalayan world, and many won't. So, in terms of a tease, just Dave, who we have on today, I think we were excited to have on, 1, to talk about the 8,000 meter world and how much has changed, 2, to talk about his nonprofit, the Juniper Fund, which has spent a couple of decades now supporting the families of Sherpa or high altitude workers who have been killed while working on the big mountains. And, this has just been an incredibly important issue in the Himalaya as the sport has grown. Sherpa having accidents, Sherpa and non-Sherpa Nepali high altitude workers having accidents up high, and how devastating it can be for a family. So I'm really excited to hear more about that. It's an organization we've tried to support at Alpenglow for decades. And then the fun thing about Dave is he was in the sport and the guiding high altitude industry a bit before me. And I just remember looking up to him, how did he do it? How did he get there? How did he get there? How did he get there? Just this wild path. And I guess all the way along, even to the point where, he had a son a few years ago who's now climbing and skiing and playing in the mountains and doing all these things. It's like he's always been one step ahead, and just so excited to dive more into his stories, how he's made it all work.
Yeah, he's a fascinating person. I think he's, he's provided some inspiration for me as a new father. He's got a kid, and he's got a great film that I really latched onto called Big World that we'll talk to him about, where he and his son went paddleboarding somewhere in India, I believe, for spring break. They paddleboarded a river, and just kind of the ups and downs of that trip, but a really powerful film, and kind of, has provided a lot of inspiration for me and what I hope to do with my son in the future.
So epic. Rad. So stay tuned for that. Dave Morton coming up in a little bit. What do we have for news?
Not much. It's kind of that Himalayan 8,000 meter fall season typically. And, the big news out of the Himalaya is that no one's been climbing because there's been kind of a massive storm, a late season monsoonal storm that's dropped a bunch of snow on all these 8,000 meter peaks, creating really high avalanche danger essentially. And, time will tell, how that's going to play out and whether or not these mountains will heal in time for the season to continue, or if that will be a kind of season ender storm. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So many thoughts, but I won't take all 70 minutes of our podcast to talk about it. No, mostly a big storm like this is interesting because, of course, we have an Alpenglow Expeditions team on Choyu, the sixth tallest mountain in the world, that I'm not guiding myself. Topo and Carla Perez are guiding the team along with Dorje Sonam Sherpa, who I just mentioned, as head Sherpa Serdar. And so, a big storm like this in challenging conditions, of course, like keeps me up a little bit at night with one stress about how it's going to play out in terms of, our clients getting an opportunity to try to climb the mountain, how safety is going to play out, and the hard decisions my friends and coworkers are having to make on a daily basis. So there's a little bit of stress. We also have great friends on the north face of Mount Everest right now. We have friends on Shisha Pangma right now, where there's just so many climbers trying to finish their 8,000 meter peaks. So a lot of people that I kind of like am getting updates from and feeling for. But you probably see my big smile and bright eyes. Like overall, like maybe this is because I'm at home in my comfortable bed, but I love when the mountains show their teeth. And that is what's happening right now. Like these storms that happen, especially in the fall, less so in the spring, where they drop meters of snow and have huge winds and like completely destroy every bit of a plan that climbers had on them on the mountain, plans that they might have been thinking about for years and planning, infrastructure built, fixed ropes put in, all these things. Like the mountains just don't give a fuck. And like there are reports that probably on Manaslu, the eighth tallest mountain in the world, 3 meters of snow was dropped. On Tibet, which snow almost never can get to the north side of the range over onto the Tibetan plateau. That's one of the reasons we like climbing so much there. There was definitely a meter at ABC at 19,000 feet. We've yet to see how much was up high, but we can see massive crowns from a big natural cycle that happened on the mountain. And so, again, easy for me to say from here, but I get excited when these things happen because they're just a reminder. We hear so much coming out of the Himalaya of like how the sport's growing and it's gotten easy and it's a formula and anyone can follow. And it's like, no. There's no formula here. And even what you said, like there's now high avalanche danger in the mountains. Like that's our assumption. Perhaps that's our forecast from what we saw, but we don't even know that. Maybe everything went through a massive natural cycle and it came in right side up and people could be climbing today. And those are these hard decisions where I think the importance of like incredible expedition leadership and humility become so important.
And you got to have interesting people because you're just sitting in a tent waiting it out a lot of times.
Well, that is definitely true. I mean, this setup is a setup that could be really dangerous or it could be fantastic where everyone's put weeks in. Most people are acclimatized. Most people are ready to go for their summit pushes. And then the storm happened, shut everyone down for 4 days. Some people made great decisions like going to base camp. Some even went to towns down below and got to relax. That's great. A couple of teams got stuck up high where they probably shouldn't have been. We won't name any names, but it sounds like everyone made it through and survived. But some people had some pretty exciting times above 20,000 feet. Some people ended their expeditions because they've got work to get back to, or they were on these very tight, that's one of the interesting things. Some companies now, not Alpenglow, are running kind of rapid ascent trips where they have no flexibility. And when something like this happens, the trip's just over, which I think is a hard pill to swallow, but it's one way. But now there's this interesting setup. So this huge pent up demand, everyone's on a schedule. The storm was massive, and now it is bluebird, no wind, absolutely perfect out for 3 days, and then it looks like the jet stream comes and probably won't allow anyone to climb for a week or more. And so imagine the decision making that's happening. Do you try to utilize those 3 perfect days, or do you wait? Can you go up and gather the information you need to feel comfortable climbing in those conditions? And sitting here being a Monday morning quarterback, we're going to watch and see.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it'll be interesting to follow along, and hopefully everyone stays safe in the Himalaya.
Absolutely. Today's podcast is brought to you by Alpenglow Expeditions, a Tahoe-based guide company with an international reputation. In its 20th year of operations, Alpenglow leads the highest quality expeditions in some of the world's greatest mountain ranges, from California's High Sierra to the rugged Himalaya. Alpenglow runs more than 40 international expeditions per year, as well as offering a full menu of guided ski and climbing courses throughout California. Join us and experience the Alpenglow difference. Welcome back to the Duffel Shuffle, and joining us now is Dave Morton. Dave, thanks so much for being with us.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
I get the lucky opportunity to introduce you. I'm sure a lot of our listeners know a lot about you, Dave, and your history in the Himalaya and kind of the different roles you've played in the Himalayan game. But for those that don't, I was thinking about like, what's important? What do I think of Dave? And your website, of course, says you're a high altitude climber, a mountain guide, a filmmaker, a nonprofit founder, and I'm sure you're a dad. There's a lot going on. And we're going to hopefully get into a few of those different things. I think when I was talking to you about having you on with Sam, I was like, Dave was always like this guy who I looked up to because he was a couple of steps ahead always. I remember you being on a wild athlete expedition to the Everest to attempt the I think West Shoulder to Hornbein, when I was trying to figure out how to get expeditions funded. I remember you were guiding on Everest when I was still mostly guiding 6,000 and 7,000 meter peaks, lower peaks in the Himalaya and South America. And then I remember when you became a dad, and I was like, damn, there he goes again. So thanks, Dave. So excited. You've been a real, motivation for me and inspiration in my life. I'm excited to get to talk to you today.
Well, likewise. I think that all just means I'm old, maybe.
That's what I was trying to say, actually. I'm glad you said it. Great. Well, Dave, where are we finding you? I think when we asked to have you on, you actually mentioned maybe some travel nightmares or fun. Have you been duffel shuffling?
I wish I'd been duffel shuffling. I was actually doing some unrelated work in Utah with some property over there, but just got home. Last night. And so I'm in Seattle, back home, doing the little drop off for my son who has a broken leg, and then back here to have a cup of coffee and chat with you guys.
Fantastic. Well, I think family was going to come later in the pod, but now we need to know how old is Thorn? I know he's a great rock climber. How did he break his leg?
So I have a 14-year-old son named Thorn. He broke his leg doing a backflip on the beach with a bunch of other teenage boys. Something awesome. that he's not a pro at. So those are things that happen when you're trying new things and you're not totally dialed.
That is not exactly what he should be doing as a 14-year-old. Were you like, yeah, Thorn? Or were you like, damn it, Thorn?
I would say closer to the latter. But
it's funny you mentioned that. I was just scrolling Instagram and saw something about how kids, when we were growing up, there were casts everywhere. Everyone had a cast at some point. And nowadays you go to the bus stop or whatever and kids don't have casts like they used to. So I kind of think it's great that kids are still getting out there, pushing the limit and maybe learning a little bit of a lesson, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. He's doing fine though.
Is this, I believe he is still competitively climbing, rock climbing, kind of indoor climbing. Is this going to have a big effect on a season of that, or?
It will. I don't want, he had what's called a triplane fracture. It's a very specific fracture when you're an adolescent. Right at 14, 15, when your growth plate's about to finish sealing up in your tibia. So it's actually, and he had 4 screws, so it's actually a fairly significant injury. but he should be back. It'll affect his season. But yeah, he's really into the competitive climbing thing. That's been super fun for me to be a part of and watch and become more of a gym climber through him.
Has it made you a better climber?
It has, for sure. Definitely on plastic and pure sport climbing. Yes, for sure.
That's cool. Well, I think we might talk a little bit more about it because I am interested in like how that widens kind of the breadth of your climbing world now, right? But obviously, indoor climbing has not been where you've focused your career. So let's rewind a little bit, and you know, I think we're of course going to talk about the Himalaya a little bit, quite a bit, but how did you actually start? I assume it was not in the climbing gym. Did you grow up in a climbing family? Like, where was your path and how did you get started? I do feel like even though you might be slightly older than me, like you were in there early on. You were a young climber in the Himalaya.
Yeah, I started, so I grew up in Seattle. I grew up as a ski racer, really. I didn't climb until I was a senior in high school. I went on my first sort of glacial climb up in British Columbia. And I was born in Kansas. My parents moved from the Midwest to the Northwest because they wanted to be outdoors. They were not climbers, but they were definitely excited about camping and hiking. They both went and climbed Mount Rainier when we first moved here with RMI. And so I remember being down at Cougar Rock Campground waiting for my dad to come down from the first time he climbed when I was a little kid. So they had a passion for being somewhere else than the Midwest. They were sort of adult skiers. But so we grew up skiing. I grew up ski racing. I spent my first, then I went out to, so I dipped my toe in it a little bit, went out to snowbird. I spent a few different winters when I was at University of Washington going to snowbird for the winter quarter and then taking summer quarters, because at that point skiing was definitely my passion. And so the first season I was out at snowbird, we had a really dry, shitty snow year. And so some friends that I'd been skiing with that season took me out rock climbing Little Cottonwood Canyon. And so that was really the first time that I started getting into the climbing thing. And, I just, grabbed onto it. I grew up watching Nat Geo films of, people in Yosemite, not having any idea how you would ever even begin to start something like that. And so that was my first foray, was getting some friends to take me out rock climbing. And then for the next 5, 6, 7 years, I just dove into it, sort of headlong. Started working for the company Cavu, outdoor small clothing company. Buddy of mine started that. And so I started, right after I graduated from college, I went down to South America, did some more climbing there, came home, started working for Cavu, and on the side was doing some guiding because I was just super passionate about it. And essentially, Cavu at one point became a natural break where a lot of us, we were a bunch of friends running it at that point, and we all moved on about the same time. And I decided to do some guiding in the in-between, and never thought that I would continue guiding or doing all the things that you have to do to make it work professionally. Right. And so just one thing after another, at one point I applied to law school thinking that I needed to go back to school instead of continue guiding. And so at the beginning, there was a lot of like, oh, can I really make this happen? So that's the quick story. And then, I ended up in the Himalaya for the first time in 2001.
In 2001. Yeah, it is interesting. That sort of like, so that means those early guiding forays were kind of like 90s guiding forays, right? And it does feel like it was in some ways a different world then, in that you could kind of jump in and start, especially in the Northwest, like lots of opportunities to be a young climber that just is ready to grind and work hard and get a start in it. And if you show something, then that can grow. But it also, I think, I don't know of anyone in the 90s, which is also when I started, that was like, I'm going to be a mountain guide for my life. Like that's not how it felt back then.
No, not at all. And, in the Northwest too, there just weren't, there's no GPS. There just were not that many people climbing. I mean, it seemed like a lot. And now in retrospect, it's like, oh, we were just this tiny community of people that were in the mountains. And so if you were guiding, in the Northwest, it was because, or if you started to guide, it was because you knew, we were in this small group of people, and that you knew the other guides, and it was all sort of word of mouth, and your credentials were based on who you knew and who you climbed with in the Northwest, because there just wasn't that much happening. And actually, my first guides training was in April of 1996 with Scott Fisher, right before he left for that infamous expedition. Yeah. So, so that was the true start, was that spring of 96. And then, 2001 was the first Himalayan trips.
And was the Himalaya trip the kind of point where you realized that you could make it guiding, or did that come later on?
No, that came later on. I mean, I did. So that at that point, when I was going to the Himalaya for the first time, I worked for Alpine Ascents. I was one of the sort of main guides at Alpine Ascents that really did heavy rotation. And, and I was, it was a very good guide. I loved people. I loved being, and I still do, love the relationships. And that's clearly why I enjoy guiding and enjoy being on big expeditions as well, is that sort of 24/7 experience with other people. For me, I actually, I really enjoy it. And I've been through times where it gets tiring. However, I think if you really are interested in other people and you love the relationships of being with other people, I think guiding's, wonderful in certain ways. Where was I going with that? I think that 2001, I went with Alpine Ascents, and I was doing heavy rotations with Alpine Ascents. I ended up basically throughout my time there, after I became sort of the lead Himalayan guide and Everest guide for them, I was doing every trip that they offered, essentially. I was gone 5 to 8 months a year for about a 15-year period, which, definitely at the end of that 15-year period, I sort of hit a inflection point or crisis point after my son was 5. So, for a long time. And my wife and I got together around that same time in 96, 97. And so we did about 15 years with me being gone a huge amount of time.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're more successful in balancing relationship with being gone 8 months a year than I have been for much of my life. Well done, Dave.
I think we're both really stubborn.
It's so true. As you were saying that, I was prepping for this podcast and kind of reading a bit more, finding some things about you on the internet. It did make me laugh because you mentioned kind of that, you hit these points in guiding where you're like, wow, I'm a bit tired, or maybe not jaded, but it's been a lot, right? And you've seen so much in your career. I think I found an article from 2016 in Outside Magazine where it's like, Dave Morton retires, essentially. He's done with Everest. I was like, that's funny. I think he told me that in 19. I'm pretty sure he told me that in 24, and we just guided together this past year on Everest. So you're still in there. But obviously you have also chosen not to make guiding your only pursuit or way to make a living. So can you talk a little bit about how you combine guiding as well as filming, being an athlete, how the nonprofit fits into that?
It's interesting. So that article in Outside was about, essentially, obviously when articles are written, there's a certain perspective and bent on it.
Yes.
And really that author's bent was that I was sort of done with Everest because of what Everest had become. And the reality of where I was in my life was a little bit more nuanced, for sure. And really a lot of it was about my son being 5, and not necessarily the state of Everest, which is what really a lot of that article was about. But my questioning sort of what I was doing and where I was going was much more about being a parent. I was still gone 5 to 8 months for the first 5 years of my son's life. And I was on Everest right up until a week before he was born. And then when he was 18 days old, I left for K2 and then came back. So there was I was basically home for 3 weeks during a 5-month period right before and after he was born. And then continued that, until 2016-ish when that article came out when he was in kindergarten. And that was a point at which I was just like, okay, what kind of parent do I want to be? What kind of father do I want to be? And so I really did go through a pretty, significant change of deciding that, I don't know how this is going to work. I don't know what kind of parent I want to be. And my dad was a wonderful father, but I had a bunch of siblings, and like I think I spent 2 weekends with just my father over like entire growing up. It was always a big family, and and we had decided we were only having one child at that point, and having just a one-on-one relationship with him was sort of like right at that age of 5 or 6 where he started to be a person. I was just like, oh my God, this is not what I want to do. And so that didn't mean I wanted to stop, but it did at that point. I decided that I was going to be traveling a lot less. And so during that point as well is when the 2014 accident on Mount Everest happened. I was there as part of the big Sony Pictures film, Everest, working as a climbing double essentially. And so that big accident was right around that similar time. And that's when the Juniper Fund started, essentially. And so the Juniper Fund, which is an organization that Melissa Arnott Reed and I started together, we began officially is 2012, but we didn't get our tax exempt status until 2013. Right at the end of 2013, December, I returned to Everest that spring in 14, and that's when that huge accident happened. We had a landing page and a PayPal button, and that was it when that accident happened. And we had thought we were just going to have a small organization. We both had experiences where people close to us, or families close to us, Sherpa families, had people die in the mountains, and so we wanted to help them out. And we both were guiding at the time, and we thought, oh, we can get some of our clients to be psyched about this and help these families. But we had no idea that it would turn into such a impactful organization. And part of that was the 2014 accident. And
in that accident, how many Sherpa?
That in the accident itself, there were 14, and then that season, I think it was 17 deaths. So it was huge number.
And did the Juniper Fund take on all of those families?
Yeah, we took on all of those families. And so once our tax, so officially a lot of our numbers that we've kept track of and the beneficiaries that we have are based on that beginning of 2014 date. And then 2012 when we actually started. But so we took on all those families, and since then there's been 69 expedition workers that have passed away since November 2012 that are part of our beneficiary community and families. And I think that that's something like 290 something family members that we've been supporting in some way or another through some sort of grant. And so we do a wide variety of programs. But the primary one, which it started with, is this cost of living grant, which we're basically, for 5 years, providing totally unrestricted funds for families to be able to use however they need to use during 5 years. And we give it out every 6 months. And that's really to pay the bills, try to get them back on their feet. And we have a whole program that we go through each year, sort of leading up to that 5th year where then they're on their own, trying to help them get financially independent and lots of different other support vehicles for them, from financial to emotional to all sorts of different aspects.
So we kind of just dove right in. So the Juniper Fund supports families of high altitude workers who have been lost while working or climbing in the Himalaya. Is that a fair description?
Correct. Yeah.
And 69 families now. I'd love to dive into those numbers a little bit, but like when I was trying to capture this a little bit or think about it earlier, can you tell us maybe one story about one family, that kind of has been through the program or is going through the program, just to humanize it a little bit, like an example of what happened to the climber, and then how has the family's life changed from that accident and then through to today?
Yeah, so there's definitely a handful of super interesting and uh, lots of different unique stories. One that is a great example of how some of our impact has really hit some of these families. There's a woman named Kam Futi whose husband died in the 2014 accident, actually. Um, and so a lot of these families, especially since 2014, we keep in contact with and we meet with every year, either myself or Melissa or our executive director, Christine Haas. Um, and so, it's a really long-term relationship. So this woman, Kamfuti, her husband died. She had, I believe, 3 young children. She went through the 5-year program of us giving her the cost of living grants so that she could essentially support herself. She eventually took advantage of a vocational training program that we did to teach a bunch of the widows she was in one of our first classes of going through a restaurant training program where they learned to cook, prepare meals, and then as well took advantage of one of our business grant programs. So we start a lot of businesses with widows and something they're interested in. A number of them have started tea shops or restaurants or little lodges, mostly in Kathmandu. She did that. She had a successful tea shop restaurant for a number of years. She saved up enough money to be able to buy some property in Solu, moved back to the village, and cleared a bunch of property and bought it in a strategic spot for heli landings. And so now she makes a fair amount of money with charging the helicopter companies to land on her property in a key spot in Solukhumbu.
Wow.
And her son, one of the sons who we've had a long-term relationship to, supporting him, he came to us and said, it has been such a huge impact for my family because I'm unique in that when my father died, I'm expected to take care of my mother. And I basically would have spent the rest of my life, more or less, until she passed away, taking care of her. But because she's completely independent now and can make enough money to support herself and be on her own, I'm basically free to pursue what I want to pursue. So we've helped him as well. And a lot of these older children, as they get older, we are involved continually, and they're applying for discretionary grants that may be furthering their advanced education or doing some sort of vocational training. So it's a wide variety. Some people are involved with climbing. Other things are totally different, totally outside of any sort of climbing related activities.
Dave, I think it's really cool that you guys have, the cost of living grants that basically keep someone or keep a family on their feet after a significant loss. But then you also have all these other grants. What percentage of donations are going to the cost of living grants versus all these other vocational training and opportunity grants?
So we're just about to hit $1 million in money that's been given out in grants to our beneficiaries. I think during this year we'll hit $1 million. About 80% of that, 85% of that is for these cost of living grants, and then the other percentages are for all those other things I just described. And then we also have been beginning slowly to get back into primary education grants. Originally, we didn't focus on that. However, with our just monitoring this whole NGO space in Nepal and talking to a lot of the people that we're involved with over there, it's become clearer and clearer that a lot of those people are not following through those commitments for primary education. And so we've started to dive back into a little bit of that. But mostly our education related grants have been for secondary education.
Yeah, I mean, Dave, for me, the Juniper Fund has just become such an important piece of the puzzle of guiding in the Himalaya, I'd say. I had a co-guide, Nepali Sherpa named Nima, have a really horrible accident in 2004 with me when I was guiding for a company called Earth Treks. And, I was a 20-something-year-old kid, and it was my first fatality and a great friend. And I knew right away, and suddenly Chris Warner and Earth Treks, this great company that I worked for at the time, there was just no question we were going to support that family forever and help, do what we could for his child Pemba. And, there was no question, but there was also no structure, and it relied on the goodwill, of course, of people, and also on the fact that we were going to come back over and over and over again, which is really easy to think. I think someone will, and then life changes and things happen. And my career, obviously, in the Himalayas stayed strong, and I was able to maintain that commitment. But I think even with good intentions and good people, it can be really hard to maintain those commitments over years and decades. And that's where I saw the Juniper Fund stepping into this incredibly important role of a commitment that these families who have just been destroyed and devastated can actually trust.
Yeah. Yeah, how much time you've spent over there, you totally get. And a couple of things you just said are exactly are very pertinent to the whole how things function over there. Essentially, a lot of those, and we're not perfect. We're trying to, we try not to let the perfect get in the way of the good, and we've figured out a lot over time. But one of the biggest things, like you just mentioned, one of the there's no question that in retrospect now, the one thing that we are offering that is so impactful to them is the commitment, is the returning over and over and over every season, every year. Because a lot of the people over there, when they do suffer a tragedy, and there's trekkers or there's climbers or there's whoever that wants to swoop in and do, a lot of good, which is totally understandable. But I don't think a lot of people think through how that really works, and what kind of money is actually helpful or what kind of money is unhelpful. It's really complicated, but most often people, they're not. It's not a commitment, and for us, the commitment is the huge piece. And I can't tell you how many families have told us, you guys keep coming back, and it really is a long-term relationship. And as the years have passed, I've really learned to hold on to that as really the big function that we are providing, because that trust is really there, and a lot of those families mentioned it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, the industry, of course, has been going through a lot of change and a lot of growth, and good and arguably bad. It's certainly different than when both of us got into it. But you mentioned 69 families you support. This is obviously this huge loss of life that has happened in the industry. And I think we look at the mainstream media, especially today, there is a lot of sort of shit talk about climbing in the Himalaya, and especially Everest, and how how it all works. With your decades of experience, and especially working with the Juniper Fund, it's a hard question, but is the net benefit of climbing and what we've done, is it clear? Is the loss, has it been worth it? Is a hard thing to say, but how do you balance what we do and the risks that's been taken and how these families have been affected?
Yeah, it's a good question, huh?
Not an easy one.
No, it's not. And I think that the way, I think my opinion has slightly, not changed significantly, but kind of just, there's been nuance to it over the years. And I mean, ultimately it comes down to, as the Juniper Fund, and myself personally too, I think that the key is letting those people lead. The workers that are there, and what they want, and what they think that they need, and what the trade-offs are, and the pluses and minuses, I think is sort of key and is our sort of guiding light. And so, we could sit around and talk about the pluses and the minuses and the benefits and the tragic parts of the whole industry. And we do that at base camp when we're discussing the whole, ecosystem over there. But the bottom line is that we are supporting these people and these families, and they believe that this is a positive for their families on, the net whole of it all. And so I can totally sympathize with people that are on their computers reading another article about Sherpas having died carrying rich people's stuff, the whole sort of easy story to write. but when you really get down into the weeds of the way, I mean, a lot of this is just messy humanity we're all part of, and people trying to get ahead and better their
Yep.
advantages for their own families. And so anyway, it's a long-winded way to say that we feel like we trust their analysis of it and how they want support and where they want support. And of course, there's probably high altitude workers and Sherpas and Nepali families that think that it's a net negative, but there's very few of those, I think, overall.
Yeah, that's really well said. And is it? Are you seeing a transition then from the Juniper Fund or in the Juniper Fund as Nepal and Nepalis are taking ownership, and I mean that in a really positive way, over more and more facets of guiding and Himalayan climbing? Is there also anything coming that can do like government insurance programs, or is there anything coming that could do what Juniper Fund does?
We've stopped monitoring that. For a long time, we were trying to influence the Nepali government and trying to figure out ways in which we could insert ourselves and put some pressure on and try to figure out how we could change that whole side of things. For a long time, at the initial, the first few years of Juniper Fund, I spent a lot of time running around to insurance companies in Kathmandu trying to figure out if we could take out higher.
I bet those were fun meetings.
Yeah. And then we tried to figure out with the government. I mean, essentially, it's not a good use of our time and money to try to influence the way that the regulations are in Nepal, and instead just try to make our impact by working one-on-one with families. So
hands down.
So I don't know. I don't have a lot of faith. I do think it'll just gradually change as the pressures change. It's just Nepal with the changes in administrations and ministers and all of that, as you know, Adrian. I think it's just a very slow moving machine. And as you've said, I think maybe on Duffel Shuffle or elsewhere in articles, it's these days Mount Everest should just be like Denali or Mont Blanc or some well-regulated mountain that's an iconic mountain that people want to climb that don't have the experience to climb it, and use professionals to help that happen.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about Everest. I mean, that's a great segue, but where do I want to start? I mean, well, first of all, since you just said that, is there room for that? The commercial, you being an athlete and having attempted hard, personal climbing on Mount Everest, as well as, obviously commercial guiding on the mountain. Is there room for both moving forward as commercial guiding is growing and growing, and the impacts of that are clear, as well as the benefits? Is there still room, does it work to have that and also have, the experiences that both of us cherish so much at the cutting edge of the sport?
I mean, I think that, of course there's room in the Himalaya, and there's probably also room on Mount Everest, right? I mean, there are not only potentially new routes, but there's a lot of routes that are hardly ever done where people have plenty of opportunity to be there by themselves. And so, yeah, I think of it as many of us that are involved there do. And yeah, I think that it's nice to be able to have other iconic mountains in the world that you can equate it to, because it starts to make a lot of more sense to people, I think, in terms of Denali. Nobody's complaining about the fact that they that it's busy on the Czech Direct or something. You can go have all sorts of cutting edge fun on Denali, and there's all sorts of people going up the West Buttress. So
yes,
yeah, I mean, I think that obviously there's space for that. And I personally, I think I returned to Everest for the same reasons that you do, Adrian. And maybe there's not a lot of climbers around us in our community of climbers that get that
Mm.
unless you actually go do it a number of years. And I think a lot of that started for me at the beginning, similar to you. When I went to, in 2004, was my first season on Everest when I summited. And then 2024 was 20 years when I summited this
Yes.
past May with Alpenglow and Adrian.
And is that 7 summits over those 20 years or?
That was 8.
8.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And
this is how we're going to keep Dave in for a few more, because 10 is just such a nice round number.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's all the relationships, and it's, in the beginning I was fixing the Lhotse face with Sherpas, and I know you did that some years. Yep. And, just that brotherhood of really working hard together and pulling off dreams for people was super exciting. And it's those relationships that keep me going back there. It's still a special place.
Absolutely. And I honestly, those relationships and that challenge and the unknowns, Sam and I were talking in the news before you jumped on. We do a news segment on each podcast, and we were talking about how the Himalaya just showed its teeth this past week with this huge storm, right? And everyone's plans just went out the window with a 2 to 3 meter storm, and now jet stream winds coming, and who knows how many tents are left on the mountain, fixed ropes, anything. And I feel for the teams fighting over there, and I'm also just twinkle in my eyes, so excited, oh, the shit's real now, and the decisions people make in the next 7 to 14 days are going to be powerful, and there are going to be lots of different outcomes.
But you're mostly excited because you're at home with coffee, sleeping in your own bed.
Gonna go run in t-shirt and shorts in the little hills today. Yeah. It's so true. But it
not having to shovel out the tent just to make a cup of coffee.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, we got the shit kicked out of us this spring, the winds came, and the infrastructure that we'd worked so hard to put into place got stressed, especially our communications. And we still had to work really hard and dig into our athleticism and our mountain guiding experience to have a great outcome on the mountain. And I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I think I'm just, to be honest, especially where I've gotten to over the last 20 years, I'm just grateful to be able to make my living moving my body and being out in those places with people. I mean, it's just, I cherish it more and more the older I get.
Yeah.
And I love those intense environments for sure. Also, that's why originally we're all attracted to those challenges and a certain level of risk taking to, I mean, I think a lot of that, the whole risk taking of climbing is obviously a topic that gets talked about forever and ever. But I think that those, I mean, there's just so much. I think that those of us that like to go into those environments and take certain measured risks and push ourselves, it's all coming from that same place. And I think that being on Everest and guiding commercial clients, there's that same exact element for them and for us when things get difficult.
Yep, absolutely. Well, before we move away from guiding, we're a podcast of mountain guides, and we talk a lot about mountain guiding, and Sam and I get up on our soapboxes often and talk about AMGA, or American Mountain Guides Association certification. And, Alpenglow really leans into that. And Dave, you're one of these great examples of a guide that I just have all the respect for in the world that didn't go the AMGA route. And so can you speak for a minute just about, perhaps why you made that decision in your career, if it was a conscious decision? You don't have to defend why you can be a fantastic mountain guide without it, because we all know that. But sort of just how it fit into your puzzle, or didn't, and what you think of it today.
Yeah, it's so I think it was. So a lot of it was just the way, by chance and serendipity, the way that my life or my career happened. Obviously, so I'm 53, and at my age, when I was starting to guide, nobody had AMGA certification.
Yep.
Maybe a couple Europeans that were living in the States. And then there were the first couple Americans. Actually, in 2001, Steve House was on Choyu. That was my first Himalayan 8,000 meter trip. And Steve was trying to push himself and see how fast he could climb 8,000 meter peaks. And he was also talking up AMGA at the time. And so that was sort of my first exposure and the first realization that people were actually starting to go into being certified. But there were very few my age.
Sure.
Steve's only maybe a year older than me. But anyway, so I did do a couple of AMGA courses around 2009, 2010, just because I was at a point where I didn't want to go back to Everest. I was doing some volunteering for Khumbu climbing school with Conrad, a couple of those seasons. So anyway, because I felt so compelled to make a living and it was hard when I was guiding, I felt like before any sort of sponsorships or speaking or photo video work that I got into later, there was a point at which I was just like, how can I stop and do AMGA and take a whole season off and do the training and then pay for it and not be working? And so for a long time, it was sort of that. And then when I did take some time off and start to do some other things, I took a couple courses, and I wasn't like, okay, I'm going to do the AMGA, get IFMGA certified. It was, oh, I've got some time right now. I would love to check it out and see what it's like. And so I did that. And then right about that same time, I got, a really good sponsorship contract with Eddie Bauer, and got to, we were paid well to go on lots of expeditions and get to climb stuff that we really wanted to climb. And so then that put a hold on the AMGA courses. And so for me, I think that I would have figured out a way to make it happen over all those years if I really had made it a priority. But for me, I didn't put it up there as, a top priority. And so it just sort of happened that way. I'm super positive about it. All the training, all the courses I have done have been amazing. And clearly if I was 20 something again, I would do it. No question.
There you go, Sam. Don't quit. Dave says, don't quit.
Well, I was going to ask, I think a lot of your path is just the era that you started in. And do you think that you can have someone take a trajectory like your career has been without the AMGA at this day and age? Or do you think, from what you've seen, that it's kind of an important trajectory or path nowadays?
I think overall it's probably pretty important. Just the community. I do think that it's the credentials, the experience of learning. I think overall I think it just creates a good culture. I think the standards are higher. I think the continuing education. I just think all that stuff's a positive for sure for guiding. And so I think overall it's. Despite the fact that we have our system with public lands, all that sort of stuff, that's the crux in the States. But I think overall it's, super positive. And then for a while I was like, oh, I just got to get one. I should just go do rock just so I've been in this industry so long. I should at least be certified in one thing. But
it's
but
never,
I haven't.
It's never too late. But in the meantime, I just love to, get to say that Dave's grandfathered into the Alpenglow system, just associating you with grandfather, reminding everyone of your age, Dave. It's a great thing.
Yeah. I was actually just at a social gathering for this film about the Seattle Mountain Rescue and the Austrian rescue team. It's a documentary, and my friend was hosting a little get-together cocktail party before they premiered it, and was talking to some of the guys that work for that Austrian rescue company that are IFMGA guides. Yeah. And they were asking me about guiding here, and they even they have been IFMGA guides for 20 years.
Yeah.
And they still are like, I still don't get it. How does it work? How do you guide? I don't understand. And
it makes like, no sense.
I know it doesn't. But
to the Euros, for sure.
No, and it doesn't make any sense. And it's also still like, for me, I get by with, if I'm guiding my, nowadays I have sort of a handful of real boutique-y sort of clients where I'm doing one-on-one work with when I'm guiding, but it's much more part-time. But, I just because of the relationships and the long-term part of the community, I can use North Cascades Mountain Guides guest guiding permits or this or that, and they just don't even understand how that could possibly work or how it works. And it is kind of a clunky system, so trying to explain it to those guys is like,
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like I've spent, like all of us, but especially since I've done a lot of guiding in Europe over the years, just spent years and years and years trying to, like, you can't justify it, but why I can come, especially to their countries, and work on their lands with very few limits, and there is just no way into their guiding in the US, at least in the places they want to, which are primarily Yosemite and Denali, and having to try to explain, but it's not just you because you're French or Swiss or Italian. I can't guide on Denali or Yosemite either, and still to this day, 2024, that like blows a European guide's mind. It's a really unusual system, and I can understand why it's built this way, but I still think in my time, I still expect to see change, and hope we do for the Sams of the world and the next generation after the Sams of the world. Just more freedom to guide here, I think, will be a good thing for everyone involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, switching gears a little bit, Dave, we kind of started talking about your, adventure life as a father as well. And, I watched a film of yours called Big World that was really inspiring to me. I've got a 13-month-old, and just kind of thinking about an adventure like that when he's, not too much older than he is now is pretty special. Talk a little bit about, how you have integrated fatherhood into your life as an adventurer.
Me and Sam are going to start taking notes now. We're ready. Tell us how, Dave.
Well, that film in particular, when we went to Nepal, my son, what I referred to earlier, to that whole period when he was in kindergarten, where I decided, I need to be around more. We spent, I think he was 7 then. That was something like 2017, 18. And instead of going guiding that spring, we went and did this river trip in Nepal, and we literally planned it. I literally planned it by looking at Google Earth and just like zooming in on rivers and thinking, and I'm not a river guy, like at all. And I'm like zooming in on Google Earth. Are those rapids big? Are those rapids small? Can't tell. They look fine. We can probably put in there. And so we went in super remote Western Nepal and just did this, stand-up paddleboard river trip. And at the time I was really like, I got to do adventures with him before, it's too late. And I was feeling that just because everything that was going on with guiding. And so we did this amazing trip, and it truly, like, looking back and even during it, I was like, yeah, I'm not so sure this might have been pushing it a little bit.
He was
my
7,
son was 7.
right?
I was like, here's how you push the SOS button on the inReach. And, we were actually pretty out there. And so I don't know if I would exactly repeat sort of that level of adventuring, but at the time I really thought that we would be able to do a big adventure like that every year. And of course I look back and I'm like, wow, this is way harder to pull off, especially with a young, that time between that age at 7 and now 14 in the last couple of years, when my son's had his entirely own life, you don't realize how just quickly that all happens and goes by. But we've really tried to integrate, just making sure that, part of it is the messaging of pushing yourself, taking some risks and adventuring. And that trip was part of that. And then we've done a lot of other trips that are similar. And so while you can't, once these kids have their own lives, which is pretty fast, and they're not even that old when that starts to happen, it's really hard to actually pull those things off. But just integrating it into our sort of daily lives now that school's important and all those sort of things is, I think, really important. And then those lessons when he was younger, I think, well, later on, when sort of his schooling part's done, carry over. And, my son's, in some ways, his personality is, he loves the competition climbing. He's climbing hard at a young age. it's amazing. But he's, he's still in that like, oh my God. Like we climbed during COVID, we climbed the Grand Teton together, escaped when he was pretty young. And he's just like, I don't understand all the walking part. Like, why do we have to walk so far?
God, he sounds like Alex Honnold. What
Oh
the
my God.
hell?
It's like, yeah. I mean, even I remember, yeah. It's like, we got to walk 20 minutes to the crag. It's like,
That's amazing. So that was going to be one of my questions. Like, has he shown any interest in kind of like the expeditioning style big mountain stuff? Maybe you've already answered that. Like, also, how do you educate around risk and feel about him if he did choose to explore there more?
um, I talk, when the subject comes up, I talk about the realities of sort of what I've done in the past and what I do, and how that's managed and the different tolerances. And, I think a lot of it's just talking about the gray and the decision making, and that there's no black and whites about this stuff. And the really, what I feel is like really manageable risk that I deal with nowadays, which seems very conservative and manageable in some ways to me, may have a completely different. His friends' parents may have a whole different perception of that, right?
Absolutely.
And so I think that those things are just really, they're very personal, and so we talk a lot about that in terms of how I address those things, how he addresses those things. Although did I just lose you guys?
You're still there. We just lost your camera.
You lost my camera?
Yeah, we can't see you, but we can still hear you.
Sorry, guys.
Oh,
You're good.
fine. We can call Thorn in to help with your technology if we need.
I know. So true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, So, yeah, we had a lot of conversations about that stuff, and he was a intense downhill mountain biker. He had a really big accident when he was 11. He just had this broken leg doing backflips with his buddies on the beach. He's becoming wiser and wiser every day, but he's definitely got there's some risk tolerance baked into him that may be a little higher than others.
Has he followed you with a passion for skiing? I kind of forgotten that was such an important part of your foundation. Does he love it?
He was like part of a race program up at Coastal Mountain when he was younger, and he loves skiing for sure. And he did his first couple races, and I remember going out as like volunteering as a parent for the first couple races and just being like, oh my God, this is so amazing. I love this. I loved ski racing as a kid. I'm going to be like volunteering with the parent group and getting to watch all these kids get strong and older. And that did not last very long. And now it's in the climbing gyms at the competitions. And I have to say, I'm quite happy with the way it turned out. I think getting to climbing gyms and, traveling for the divisionals and national competitions and all that is way less of a time commitment and hassle than ski racing, to be honest. So it's
financial commitment.
Exactly. I think every Tahoe parent is like, please don't let my kid go deep into ski racing. Like, you want it and you don't want it. There's a lot of conversation around that.
Yeah.
Well, we've talked a bit about Thorn and his aspirations. Dave, I'm certainly looking forward that we'll be seeing you on Mount Everest again. But what about you? Do you have personal aspirations in the big mountains? Are you still driven by that? Any goals? How does it fit in today?
It's funny. I still do have. I don't know if it's wise at this age, but I still do have a desire to go climb an 8,000er without O's. And it's funny. I look back and I'm like, how did I not ever do that? And I think a lot of it, a lot of it was trying to pay the bills and make money during the time that I was first on Everest and thought about it. But so I just went back and guided for those reasons. But then also, in some ways I look back and I'm like, I don't know. I think I didn't have the confidence and the knowledge at a lot of those points. And so nowadays I look back and I'm like, oh, the way I was climbing when I was late 30s and 40. I was so strong at those points. And
Yep.
in retrospect, it's like, oh, that would have been very challenging, but I think very reasonable. And maybe I'm kidding myself, but now it's a much different program at my age compared to then. And, like I went to Makalu one year. I'd like to go back there. I was up, I was very close. I was up over 8,400 that year we had no shirt, no oxygen, etc. And I turned around, but a lot of that was just late in the day, not having the confidence, not having been on a lot of 8,000ers without O's that high. And I was by myself. And so, and a bunch of people turning around, there was about 8 people trying to do those that day. One person that was nearby me that didn't turn around ended up dying on the way down. And, but in retrospect, I think that I just didn't spend enough time doing it to really learn those limits and where mine probably were. So I never had enough multiple experiences to sort of dial it in. But I still have that interest of potentially doing. I think other people's experiences post 50 doing it, I've watched kind of carefully, and still not sure whether it's a wise thing or not.
I mean,
so no commitments that I want to express publicly.
Wise is a very loaded word, right? I think we're still absolutely seeing climbers in their 50s having success on big mountains without supplemental oxygen. It's certainly possible, right? And with a wealth of experience, I think it's certainly possible. I'm just trying to tell myself this right now as well, Dave. I think it's certainly possible to still be conservative and attempt those things. At the same time, I remember Conrad Anker when he finally summited Everest without oxygen, and maybe told you the same thing. I think he had a plan to do it, and he didn't do it until I think he was 50, right? I think he might have been exactly 50 when he finally did it in 2012. And I remember he knew I had aspirations to try that, but I was busy guiding every year and doing the whole thing. And he just sat me down and stared me in the eye. And he's like, whatever you do it before you're 50. I think he very clearly saw how much harder it was. He succeeded. But
yeah, he's one of the people I'm thinking of, because I have talked to him about it. And I do think that I hope I'm not putting words in his mouth, but I do think that had influence on how he felt like it affected him later when he had his other heart problems. Yeah. And so, and Ralph Dumovitz also, I've talked to a fair amount about it, with his multiple attempts past 50.
Yeah.
To climb Everest.
Ralph is such a wild story, right? He's done 13 of the 14 without supplemental oxygen and has really put effort in over decades onto Everest. A wild career.
Yeah, and this season it was interesting to watch. Valery Babanov was over, who I think he's gotten the PLA door a couple times, and I can't remember how old he is, but mid 60s, trying to climb without O's, and didn't work. But I was very curious to see, some of these older folks and how that is playing out. But it's because again, right now I'm having such a good time rock climbing and gym climbing with my son and my wife as well. But our family doing that is sort of the focus. That it's still hard to get super motivated and focused on something like that when there's just so many great experiences to be had with those other sorts of easier endeavors with family and pushing myself for sure too. I'm climbing harder sport climbing than I ever have, and bouldering, too. So it's
rad
fun.
Is that? Although I am constantly reminded that's not because you get so much better at rock climbing in your 50s. It's just that you weren't very good to begin with. Or at least that's what the people around me keep telling me.
You didn't have to mention that, Adrian. No, I'm in the same boat as you in that one.
It's so true. I'm just still getting better, and people are like,
yeah.
Well, excellent. Yeah, rock climbing sure is a lot of fun. It's so funny. I'm in that constant just balance. Even right now, I've been I trained pretty hard for Everest this spring. guiding, after being off for 4 years, I had a lot of those fears of whether I could still do it. And I put a lot of time in, which took a lot of time away from rock climbing. And then I've kind of spent all summer suffering the consequences of that, of like just really sucking again rock climbing while traveling with my professional rock climber wife. And now we're here in the autumn and it's like, oh, I might go to Ahmed Blom and do this film project, but I also want to be in Yosemite with Emily. And they just naturally conflict all the time. And like, I'm in a constant process of having to accept mediocrity. But it's all right.
I know. I think that it's, I always, I think that, I look back on sort of my career, quote unquote, and I feel as though it's, I sometimes feel like I was just such a jack of all trades and pretty good at a lot of things, very good at endurance wise. And, I think that we might have some of those same similarities. I grew up as a cross country runner and long distance runner. And, so being in those high mountains and doing those big expeditions has always been pretty natural. And I've been pretty strong at that. And then, technical rock and ice and all those things have just been sort of like average, but I'm a great skier, but like, it's kind of just like, good at a lot of things, not really exceptional at any. And
absolutely.
And that's called a mountain guide.
That's called a mountain guide.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm going to argue all day long that, at least for me, it was the right path. I think it's helped to never be jaded, to never burn out, to potentially have fewer injuries. I mean, I can argue all day long why mediocrity in a lot of different things is the right path for me.
Yeah. Now chasing around Emily, you get your highest grades.
It is awesome.
Well, Dave, I hate to wrap this up, but I know we got to get going here. We do finish every episode with 2 questions for you. So we want to briefly hear your best Duffel Shuffle story. Think planes, trains, and automobiles.
I think my best Duffel Shuffle story was my first Duffel Shuffle story. When I was in college, me and 2 buddies decided we were going to go to South America to climb and ski and do all sorts of stuff. And we literally hauled so much shit down there. We were trying to live on $10 a day. We were taking buses, public transportation everywhere. We all had like 2 backpacks, pair of skis, ice, and I mean it was absolutely ridiculous. And if I thought we still have pictures on these that are on slides that we've just recently gotten digitized.
Yeah.
And literally it looks like an absolute junk show. If I saw young like outdoor athletes in South America doing what we were doing, I'd have to sit them down and have a talking to them about the wiser, smarter ways to be doing things.
I want to see those photos.
It was really bad. Like, yeah.
I can, and just also imagining like today, the buses in like Peru and Bolivia, they're beautiful. They have lie flat beds. You get served food, like there's baggage handlers, but like 90s buses in South America, they didn't look like that. I can imagine where those bags were going.
Oh yeah. And the people, I mean, all the locals with their like, chicken cages or whatever, all the stuff they were carrying, they were just like, they'd see us and they'd be like, oh my God, it's going to take like 15 minutes for these guys to load all their stuff up on top of the bus.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, that's a good one. I like it. And our second question, Dave, is for that next trip that you're going on, whether it's with your son or a climbing competition or back to Mount Everest this spring, what is the very first piece of gear or equipment that's going to go in those duffel bags you would just never travel without?
Gear or equipment? I was going to, well, I was just going to say, I've gotten really into reading hardcover books again. For a long time, I was doing Kindle, years of Kindles.
Yeah.
And I just, for some reason, just rediscovered reading books that are not all hardcover, but paperback too, but just the tactile nature of reading books. I've all of a sudden in the last 6 months gotten on this big trip of reading physical books again. So it's not a piece of gear, but I think I would actually
it counts.
load up 4 or 5 books on my next expedition.
You're going to go back to that. Do you remember you
I'm
bring
going
like
back.
a duffel bag of books because you're
Yeah,
going to
I'm
be
going
there
back.
for 2.5 months? Well, that's awesome. And I love that we seem, Sam, to have a theme of like books, Kindles, whatever form.
I think the last answer was a Kindle,
being
and
the
now we're
first
back
thing.
to books. So,
Oh, really?
It seems
Love
like
it.
we might be choosing like nerds as guests who have somehow gotten lost in the mountain world. Which
Oh yeah, let me. I'll save myself. So the other thing, Houdini is always something that's always in my pack. A Patagonia Houdini or
windbreaker jacket,
whatever brand it is.
Yeah.
That wind shell. That is the one thing that I have anxiety and panics about if I somehow forget it, no matter what endeavor I'm
100%.
on for the day.
Awesome. Well, Dave, thank you so much for taking the time. Awesome having a conversation with you. And we look forward to following along your adventures with you, your son, and maybe an 8,000 meter peak without O's.
All right.
Yeah, Dave, thank you so much. I mean, we could do this 3 more times, and I don't think we'd cover all the questions I had. So hopefully we'll get you back. And can you just remind people, along with the film Big World, really was like a transformative one for me, made by you and Duct Tape and Beer. Fitzcahal just told this beautiful story. So listeners, if you haven't seen it, YouTube, Big World, check it out. But David, where else can people follow you, support you, and learn more?
Yeah, definitely following along with the Juniper Fund's Facebook and Instagram and checking out our website, what we do. I don't really post anything much more on social media, so find me there for sure.
Juniper Fund. All right, thanks for all you do in the sport industry and in the mountains, David.
Thanks for listening to episode 13 of the Duffel Shuffle with Dave Morton. Dave is a true adventurer, but he's taken it a step further in founding the Juniper Fund, and his commitment to Sherpa families in need is admirable. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, rate us, and leave us a review. This simple support is what we need to keep this podcast going. Stay tuned for episode 14. We'll be back in a couple weeks.